Planet of Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, for this week's episode of Breaking History, where I'm very happy to be joined once again by Ghost of Based Patrick Henry Gordon. How you doing, man?
I'm great, Matt. It's good to see you again. Yeah, you've been. Looks like you're back home in Canada. Do you have snow?
Yeah. First day back. Well, we got back. It was chilly when we walked off the plane. We were in Thailand, for those who don't know, for 6. Well, we're in Italy for 2 weeks, then Thailand for 4 weeks. So we had a lot to do, and I kind of forgot what snow was, and so it was a really rude slap in the face when we got back. And we had a snowstorm, and I committed to not seeing snow anymore for 2025, and I got back, got hammered. So that was a bit dizzying. Got my winter clothes back on now, so I'm readapted to Canada.
Yeah. The weather broke here like a week or two ago, and it was like 80 degrees, 90. I mean, it was like 100. It was almost 100 degrees here one day, and now it's dropped back down. It's like 45, I think, today. But it's beautiful outside. I mean, absolutely beautiful. So, spring is definitely in full swing here in Virginia. But the weather here in Virginia, it could literally be 90 degrees one day, and the next day it's 45. So,
Right. Well, that's it. The best was Calgary, Alberta, where you have these Inukchuks. You ever hear of the Inukchuk?
No. What's that?
It's this weird phenomenon that happens because of the Rocky Mountains. And I went there on a January in must have been 2004. That was the last time I went to Calgary in wintertime. And literally, I woke up and it was a snowstorm. It was a deadly snowstorm, super, like -20. That's Celsius. I don't really know my Fahrenheit very well, but so -20 Celsius is very cold, plus wind chill, super snowy. And then by like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything was melted. People were walking around in t-shirts. So you have the most volatile variabilities of climates. And again, I don't fully know the science of it, but I know the name is Inukchuk, and it can drive somebody crazy. Because you don't know what to wear when you leave the house in the morning.
Interesting.
Yeah. That being said, we got a lot to talk about, and I know there's a few things we were discussing before the show that we'll hit at. Obviously, we're pretty good at improvising, so we'll just see where the conversation takes us. But before we do any of that, I think probably a word from the first ad read today is going to be in order. So I'll just pull up. Oh, it's going to be on Gart, right? So I'm going to read an ad for Gart for those who might be in or around New England in a couple of weeks or 3. Was it now 3 weeks? 3.
Yeah, 3 weeks. I think we're looking at about 3 weeks, almost 3.5 weeks. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So let me read that thing. There it is right there. Okay. So the Great American Restoration Tour. Okay. Badlands Media is heading to Plymouth, Massachusetts with the 8th stop on the Great American Restoration Tour from May 1st to the 4th. Don't miss out on the conversations and shenanigans. Get your tickets today, or virtual tickets today. With virtual tickets, ensure that you are part of the action wherever you may be. You will gain access to an exclusive Gart chat to interact with other in-person and virtual attendees. You will get behind-the-scenes photos and videos. You will get to ask the panel questions so that you can be a part of the discussion. While many of our show hosts are at the conference, you may notice some changes to our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah, sorry about that, folks. Get your fix of Badlands Media by purchasing your virtual tickets today. And if you can't watch live, don't fret. Replays of the entire event will be available to all ticket holders. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/Badlands for details on both in-person and virtual tickets.
Awesome. Yep. And you may have noticed, for people who are watching, that Matt's name is on that list. So Matt will be at this Gart. Every Gart that I've been to since we started doing the show together, every person has asked me. Just about every person I've met. I've probably met at this point. I did the math, like over 1,000 people I've met face to face, like spoken to easily, and it could be much more than that. But I think every single person I've spoken to has been like, "When is Matt going to come to a Gart?" And this is it. Matt's finally coming to a Gart. We will meet for the first time in person. So we've obviously spoken many, many times on the phone and on stream, but we've never met in person. So that'll be exciting. Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, people might be surprised that when they see us standing next to each other, I'm actually 4'8". I'm going to be very tiny. Yeah, no, that's not true at all. But yeah,
I didn't know if you were kidding or not.
no, this is going to be a blast. I'm really looking forward to this, and our schedules just never seem to work out for the Gart, but this time it kind of all fell into harmony. So yeah, I'm very, very much excited about this. 4 days. I mean, you guys really know how to push through the material a lot. I mean, is it 4 full days, like from the morning to the?
We start with the VIP dinner on Thursday.
Okay.
So it's basically a dinner. It's like a dinner on Thursday for the VIP.
Mm.
So you can get your normal ticket, and then for a little extra money, you can get a VIP dinner on Thursday. And it's like we have dinner, and then there's like we just hang out and have basically a cocktail party afterwards, or go to the bar that's at the hotel typically. So basically hang out with everyone on Thursday, which is really like, that's the value I think of the ticket is just like the time between the panels. The panels are great. And you get a lot out of the virtual experience. But the real fun is getting to speak to everybody in person. And we are, I've never been to like other events, but people who have come to these have told me they've gone to a lot of other events that people who are in our movement put on, and the access to the speakers is very, very limited. Like they might be like set up at like a table where you wait in line and like say hello to them. It's like we're hanging out the entire weekend. Like you'll see us in the lobby, you'll see us just walking around, and you're pretty much in conversation with somebody at all times, and it's always it's fruitful because you realize how smart and engaged like our audience is. And I'm not just saying that to like blow smoke. It's like people have very, very thoughtful feedback in the discussions and the questions they have. So it's cool to see that it's not just like, small talk conversation. You know what I mean? So, and I've made a lot of friends. Like a lot of people keep coming back to the Garts. I now recognize people like their name in chat because everyone will identify themselves as who they are in chat. And so it's nice to have a face with a name, to have these friendships. And then the best part that's come out of the whole Gart stuff is these communities that have formed, because like I think we have one in every single state now, or almost every single state, where these communities form, and then they go and they do their own meetups, like without us. Or if there's a Badlands host in the area, that they may come to it, but they'll go have like dinner together, and some of these places they'll have like 30 people in a room together, and they form their own like communities. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And I've said it before at Gart on stage that's probably the most important thing that's come out of the whole Badlands platform, is like these networks that have formed, where these like-minded people, because the people who come to this, like they'll get up and they'll speak, because there's always opportunities for them to do that during these panels. And they have given like powerful testimonies about getting involved locally, and like cleaning out their election rolls, like fixing their election systems at the local level, being on the election board, running for office and winning at the lowest level of government. And like those are the little baby steps that we need to take as a movement in order to like reclaim our sovereignty, because expecting it just to be fixed at the federal level and that fixes it, that's a silly idea.
No, that's really great to hear, man. And I'm so much looking forward to that. And because what you're talking about sort of addresses this paradox that I've been sort of trying to work through over the years. And I encounter this in so many people I talk to, which is like, you get these extremes of we have to be bottom up. And you get this extreme of rejecting any idea of the utilization of the nation state to think about the nation as a whole, because the nation is obviously very corrupted, and people get very demoralized when they just start observing and mapping out the degree of corruption of so much of our modern society, that they end up getting reactionary and going to this anarchistic extreme, rejecting the idea of taking back the nation. And then inversely, you get those like Jeffrey Sachs, who are very much focused on, we need global governance institutions to manage all of our global problems. And it's like, well, there's not really much of a role to play for individuals. There's almost like a disdain amongst the technocratically minded crowd out there, whether they have a whatever their persuasion is in their political discourse. They ultimately are united in a common disdain for bottom up, for people, for humanity, for families, for communities. They don't really care, because they just think on a very abstract level about humanity as a machine that can be programmed by better software engineers or whatever to like blah, blah. And you get these dichotomies. And then it's like, well, why are we falling into these controlled oppositions? Because they both seem to be cutting us off of our full faculties, since we should be simultaneously thinking on both, like taking care of our families, organizing, building our capacities as sovereign citizens, which takes work and practice, like any muscle. You got to like, or any new skill set. If you're going to go play soccer, you're not going to all of a sudden compete in the big leagues. You got to like try little things. You got to like learn how your footwork works, how the game works, and you got to get better in time. And so what you're talking about with community organizers working on municipal levels, teachers unions, whatever you want to do, just that's part of the town hall factor of being in a republic, and you're training citizens to be sovereign, to be qualified, to think bigger and more responsibly about the big ideas that are shaping their world, and to be communicators, teachers, and students at the same time, such that we can qualify to. I mean, this is the old idea, I think, that goes back a long time, and then we'll shift gears for my philosophical diatribe.
Yeah, please. No, this is great.
Yeah. But this is the idea that goes back to ancient times. When you read the writings of Confucius and his school in China around Mencius, who was living around the same time as Plato, or the school of Socrates in Greece, they're all focused on how do you create a society that is governed by creative love and reason, such that every citizen can be truly free. And in the school of Mencius, who's a student of Confucius, the idea was you needed to create a society of philosopher kings. It doesn't, and that means that, because he makes the point that if you have greed or ignorance animating the culture of your leadership, that society loses its mandate of heaven. It'll become corrupted. It'll fall into discord, division, stupidification, and the society will die. And Mencius, speaking as if he sounds like Thomas Jefferson, and maybe that's why Thomas Jefferson liked Mencius, he makes the point that society that's ruled by a leader that has fallen out of the mandate of heaven, that has lost the mandate of heaven, has the responsibility to overthrow said government and institute a new one that is more befitting to protect their natural rights. And that's very much inside the Confucian classics, which are going through a massive renaissance right now in China. I watch, I was talking to you with Alex Crater a couple of weeks ago, and I've been just immersing myself watching Chinese television shows on Netflix that are available. And you could just see each one. The writers, the authors, even the actors are so immersed in this love of their deep civilizational moral teachings, and it's becoming cool amongst young people to study the classics. And you see the same thing in Plato, which we're not there yet. So in our popular culture, we have not figured out how to do what the Chinese do. So like when they have a movie like Confucius made in 2010, it's a great movie that everybody should watch. The movie Confucius. It's like an epic drama of Confucius the man as a real life political advisor trying to work to create philosopher kings amongst the warlords in the Warring States period of China, where everybody was killing everybody. And this was a real guy, not just an ivory tower philosopher working to go. And he became like the minister he became a very high level official and was punished. His students were killed, but he was like a real person working in a geopolitical environment, like a Ben Franklin. And the same thing for Plato, and we haven't made those kinds of movies and shows yet that they've done in China, but we should, because Plato was a real man creating a school to create philosopher kings, getting thrown into slavery because, one of the tyrants he was trying to organize didn't like doing geometry and wanted to just like make wars, and got pissed off and threw his teacher into slavery. And then, so all let's say there's so much drama and reality behind these men as they were within universal history, as well as their philosophy that is not separate, that we would get a better sense of what the American Revolution was all about. When you read Benjamin Franklin, you read Jefferson, I've got some more criticisms of, but you read the best of the founding fathers, and they're working through Platonic ideas of how do you actualize a republic in the real world, not just on a blackboard, but how do you do it? And they're thinking on such a high philosophical level that it puts us to shame to think we're 250 years later, and you'd think that we would have progressed as a society, right? Technology's increased, our standards of living have generally increased quite a bit compared to what they were in 1776. But the intellectual fortitude is it's collapsed so much more than you know, than what was expected of citizens and leaders. The Latin farmer who could read the Bible in its original Latin, which was a normal expectation for American citizens who were fighting in the Republic, or could read in Greek, could read the Greek texts, as well as, so you have this cognitive decline that we have to really, I think, discover, and the way we're gonna regain that is exactly what you just said: taking action as citizens, taking responsibility, going into our discomfort zones, which is how we grow wings. Like literally we get out of our comfort blanket, and that's where we learn how to fly, is like leaning into the unknown and doing it for a moral reason with responsibilities to defend those traditions. That's the way to do it. So I love what you just said, that these Gart conferences are actually playing into stimulating a real citizens movement, like a real psycho-spiritual educational process within this political fight. So again,
yeah,
that's my long-winded way of saying I'm really happy to be there and looking forward to it.
Well, I want to address what you just said, but before I do, I just want to point this out. So Sissa23, I need to start one where I think she's talking about a Badlands group. I don't have anything to talk about with my normie friends, LOL. And, like that is such a, like everyone I feel like can relate to that, because for many, many years before Badlands came along, I was trying so hard to get my friends invested in this stuff, like just invested just in like what's happening. I mean, it doesn't even need to be to the level that I'm at with it, or the things specifically that I'm into, just anything. And I just couldn't. Like they're good people. They're not bad people. They've been there. They've had my back when I went through some hard stuff with taking on like the local corruption of my government. So they're good men, but they're very comfortable. And they are distracted because they have families, they have children, they have wives, they have jobs, they have job security for the most part. So, they tend to spend their free time doing things either that, would be considered more leisure, and rather than this. And that's fine. Everyone has their own life and their own way to live it. And what I think happened is after Biden came into office, a lot of people started like on the internet, everyone was driven off of these platforms, right? Everyone, like censorship, everyone lost their accounts. Through just a series of like providential development, I guess you'd call it. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Got into contact with Warhamster, who was a commenter on like the Patriots.win, which was originally the Donald.win site. And so I recognized his name. Somebody kind of organized like a signal chat that we were both in. And then him and I just started talking. And then he was actually the one who got me on, because he has a Rumble channel. He was actually the one who got me on stream for the first time to like interviewed me about like my brother's case and taking on the local corruption of my government. And that's what got me like streaming. And then the guy that he did it with, Ron Partain, who you've done a show with Ron and Brady before. Ron was like, dude, we should just start doing this like regularly. We should start like talking about history, talking about the news cycle. So we did, I don't know, 45 episodes of that in 2022. I think it was 2022. Yeah, 2020. And then I joined Badlands in like spring of 23. And but before that, it's like when you're by yourself, like Sissa was just saying, it can be very defeating, and it can feel very isolating, and it can feel like you're by yourself. But the reality is there are millions of people out there who feel the exact same way that you do. Most of them are afraid to even express the ideas because they're afraid of being ostracized by their friends and their community. And that's why I think these Badlands communities are so important, because they give people the moral courage to be themselves out in public and express themselves, not in like an obnoxious way or like an obtuse way, but just in a way that I think humans are meant to live. Like you're meant to just be yourself and not have to mask who you are, like out of fear of being shamed. And I think that everyone in our movement, we represent a very, very diverse, a diversity of thought, so to speak, a diversity of culture, I think, across this, whatever you want to call it, MAGA truth, whatever movement for sovereignty. There is no like one doctrine or one monolithic thing. We should be able to be ourselves. We shouldn't have to like be ashamed of who we are. And I think these communities, getting into the habit of like being in a room full of people who are like-minded, where you don't necessarily agree on everything. You're going to go to Gart and you're going to have debates with people. You're going to have arguments. You're going to have discussions, and it's going to be very, very thoughtful and thought-provoking. But it's not like we're like in a cult, or we're like, oh, well, here's the one thing we all believe. So everyone's like, oh, yes, sir. And then we drink the Kool-Aid and we put on the robes. It's like, no. It's very, very, thought provoking. And I always end up leaving with like new ideas in my head of things that I wasn't thinking about when like going into the weekend. So it's good. Now, going back to what you're saying about the Confucius show, what's interesting about the idea of like media and like television shows and movies, I think people very quickly dismiss that stuff as like vapid, like bread and circus stuff. But what I think is lost on, and for good reason, because that's what it's become, thanks to Hollywood and thanks to our very, very superficial fake culture that has been cultivated in the West. It's very blackpilling. It's very demoralizing. But when you look back to like the ancient world and you look back to just in general, just how human history is developed, every culture comes up with myths. Every culture comes up with parables and stories. And those myths and parables and stories always ultimately are about, the ones that survive the test of time are about teaching lessons to the civilization, to the young people in the civilization, giving them a set of principles to aspire to become, giving them like a character set that you should aspire to be. Here's how men should act. Here's how men should strive to defend, the weak and the helpless. Like here's how men can be courageous and be better versions of themselves. And a lot of times the stories feature the flawed nature of humanity and the tragedy of the human experience. But that's part of life. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that there are downfalls and pitfalls and things don't always work out the way they're supposed to, but you can learn the lesson from the story and carry it forward. And so I think movies and filmmaking and books are certainly the modern iteration of like myth telling and like in parables. And if they're done right, they can be very inspiring and they can convey positive messages and positive lessons. But all that stuff has been infiltrated and subverted by these Satanists who hate humanity and basically want humans worshiping a screen and worshiping these really, really empty vessels that are on the screen. And that is the demoralizing, self-destructive cycle that people get into with that stuff.
Yeah, man. No, that's well said. And I was just thinking about that because Cynthia and I were just talking about how, when you look at history from the standpoint that our minds are really trying to tune we're trying to get a sense of the governing theme that's uniting all of history. What's that tune that sort of shapes everything? And there's a tension in history, right, between good and evil. And we could see that there's a consistency in the general principle of the oligarchical social organization that views humankind, whether today or whether 2,000 years ago or whether in the Western or Chinese or Indian matrix, there's a common view amongst oligarchical representatives or those who are devoted to that form of organizing society around a master-slave caste-like structure, right? That human beings are beasts to be managed by a hereditary elite who is better because they're born better, right? There's just something, and they come up with sacred myths about why their families are better than the other families. I don't know. I've heard various sacred myths that are concocted by the high priests of various cultures. One of which being the thing that you and I have alluded to in the course of many of our shows, which is the Merovingian bloodline. The oligarchical families of Europe have concocted, and I would say concocted, and have maintained over many generations that they have an ordained better divine right to rule and manage the dumb masses, because the Gnostic gospels told of the fact that Jesus had babies with Mary Magdalene, who went to the south of France and in secret, raised her babies, who were then guarded by the Priory of Sion, who then gave rise to the Merovingian bloodline and all of the ruling families from the Windsors and the Thonun Taxis and all of the ruling families that are mostly like former Viking mercenaries that just basically took over with the Norman invasion in the 11th century. Like they're just like ISIS mercenaries who then were like rewarded little dynasties and little lordships that have been enduring now for over 1,000 years. But that's really what these families were, and they were given, and maybe at first they knew it was a big joke, but I think that over a few centuries they started believing this story that becomes like enshrined that the royal families of Europe are descendant directly of the bloodline of Jesus, who is not the Jesus that is taught in the public gospels. It's the secret Jesus, the secret teachings of the Sethian Jesus, the Jesus who was the avatar of Lucifer. And you got this stuff, and it's there. They call them the Sethian Gospels. That's the stuff that was sort of uncovered in the Nag Hammadi texts that were discovered in 1945. Discovered, and I say air quotes for those who are just listening. I'm using air quotes because I think they were planted in that cave as part of a big sort of revenge of mystery cults that then acted like, hey, look, the Bible that we thought we were using is actually a concoction, and the real authentic scriptures are actually in these scrolls over here that they just discovered in 1945, right before the Dead Sea Scrolls. Similar kind of weird story. Somebody's throwing rocks into a cave, heard something clank, and they just walked it in. It's like, oh, thousands of scrolls. Oh, and blah, blah, blah. So
how convenient.
How convenient, right? And yeah, when you look into the works of these things, this is like the sacred texts of the Cathar Manichaeans, the Templar Gnostics, the Knights of Malta operations that gave rise to the Crusades. They were all following these secret teachings, which is kind of like a Christian version of the Kabbalah. That there's a secret message encoded within certain works that's given only to the elites that are capable of like breaking free of their morality and recognizing that they are God, that they create morality. It's not that there's a higher law or higher reason outside of us, like that we have to somehow harmonize with. No. That's just a tool conveniently used to control the masses who are too dumb and in genetically incapable of recognizing this truth. And this is also what Plato was destroying in the Gorgias dialogue. If people read the Gorgias dialogue, this is Plato confronting in the figure of Gorgias, a teacher of the sophists. He was somebody who was a leading figure, a real man in the real world who played a direct role in corrupting the minds of the elites of Athens, such that these young students would go on to become the politicians who then became totally corrupted, vapid, arrogant cultists when they took power, and they turned Athens from a beacon of liberty into an empire that backstabbed all of its former allies that had collaborated together to fight the Persian Empire. And it became more and more of an imperial society incapable of self-government. And Plato is calling it out. He's laying bare in this beautiful dialogue the evil of Gorgias's teachings that sound nice on the surface, but then the more you scratch at it, you're like, whoa, this guy is actually, and his student Callicles is just coming out openly, just exposing that they believe morality is just a tool of the elites to control the masses, and that the real truth is that the good is actually evil. That evil is good and good is evil, and that's the real truth that only the elites can know, but the masses must think otherwise. And so this is what, again, was in. It's so clearly these ideas are not just something that the founding fathers and Abraham Lincoln, who was again a devout reader of Plato and of Shakespeare, it wasn't just something that shaped American history. It's something that's been shaping all of world history. And it's the same thing when you read Confucius in his Analects, or you read Mencius. Yep. It's they're all getting at the fact that there's a higher natural law, and the oligarchy will always try to invert reality to make the false appear true and the true appear false. And we're in that same historical fight today. And right, that was my point. And my core idea that I was talking about with Cynthia when watching a lot of these Chinese shows is that they don't tend to have happy endings. It's incredible, right? And I think one of the things that has made us very weak in the West, mentally, emotionally weak, is that we've been fed this toxic addiction to Hollywood films where the good guys always beat the bad guys.
Yes.
It's always right. And we're always, we demand that satisfaction, but at the same time,
the catharsis.
That catharsis, right? Of just like,
yeah.
And I was just watching on the movie, on the plane ride here, I was watching this movie called The Beekeeper with Jason Statham.
Okay.
Action movie. Just
yeah. I haven't seen it, but I think I probably have seen like a promotion for it or something. But yeah, The Beekeeper. Yeah.
Total. And it's like a revenge. It's like one of these things that's designed to give you a craving for revenge. All of the bad guys die. The good guys win. While the good guy is killing a lot of the bad guys who are just so clearly bad. It's so clearly defined. There's no ambiguity like in the real world where there's much more ambiguity.
A lot of gray. Yeah.
A lot of, but there it's very clear. They get shot. They get tortured, murdered by the good guys. And, a lot of innocent civilians are also dying, but you're not supposed to pay attention to that. Yeah. And your emotions are just, I could feel like the emotional quality of too many people who drink that sort of thing in is becoming so reduced in its ability to really feel the higher sublime emotions that you need to feel if you're going to be a citizen of a republic, right? You got to be able to think on a much higher and feel on a much higher level. And you can't just expect that that reality is always going to work out like that. You get very soft when you start seeing injustices happening. Good ideas sometimes fail, often do. But it's about the process. You want to be more the way you create a society and you train a society in the arts and, as well as in life, is you don't expect to necessarily get victory, because why you're doing this is because it's right. It's not because you're going to win that you do the thing. You do the thing because your soul and conscience demands it be done. And it's the process that is what you devote yourself to. And as a consequence, you find that people who do that have access to a greater domain or a greater array of their creative powers and insight to see behind the surface of things when they give into that, knowing that, the people who risked their lives in the American Revolution knew that they were up against the biggest army in the world, and it probably wasn't going to work, that they were putting their families, there was a risk to your life, to your family, to your security by being they were farmers, but they did it because they were organized through their hearts and their minds to know that it's intellectually the right thing to do. They read Thomas Paine's, Common Sense. They were able to read the high documentation, like the high philosophical treaties that were circulating to satisfy their reason that this is necessary and it's possible. And it's maybe not probable, but it's possible and necessary. And because of those two things, it should be done. And they were able to then thus animate their conscience to say, okay, well, I'm gonna be not just a fan, in secret cheering on the Patriots or something like that, but I'm gonna get into it. And we've really kind of, I think, too many people have lost that sense of fight and what goes into really moving history against such a power structure as this ancient evil friggin' thing that's latched on like a parasite. It's not going to let go easily. So we have to really tap back into those powers. And the role of art is so key. To bring that about. So again, read what for people out there, if they want something to watch, write to me and I'll give you a list of cool things I've been watching with Cynthia as far as the Chinese stuff. But the Confucius 2010 film is like a great start. The Chinese Opium Wars movie from 1997 is a great movie as well. Fantastic. In all English subtitles, all freely available. And then the modern shows like The Double and The Pearl Diver that I've been watching, like all of these things, they're just like, they've got the highest quality of classical tragedy in order to make you yearn for justice. When you see justice, that's, I guess, the thing, right? Where we see the failure of justice, where good people deserve better, but evil has somehow subverted it due to folly, due to stupidity, due to a lack of insight by players on the stage. In the audience, our hearts
goes to an animated role of being engaged and actually, carpe diem, like seizing control of your life and energizing yourself to push forward to something greater. That is the crux, I think, of what like the call to action is in documents like the Bible. I think that is what it is all about. It's not about just, sitting back and observing reality and being like, and discerning what is good and what is evil. It is actually stepping forward and being good and being righteous and pursuing it, understanding that you will never attain perfection. You will never be truly divine in the sense that you will never break out of the inherent flaws of the human condition, because you are not a god, you are a human. But accepting that and being able to work towards transcending where you are right now. And it's the pursuit of perfection without ever knowing you will never achieve perfection, and not being too hard on yourself for that failure, but just understanding that that is part of the human experience. And I think a big problem with a lot of even people who are awake and people who are like of our mindset and are like in this movement for the right reasons is that we have been so deeply conditioned, and the conditioning goes back so long that I think we've also been conditioned to look at other cultures as something inferior to our own, and therefore something that we should reject completely and just not look at anything that they're saying, because anything they're saying that might be compelling or might be interesting is a subversion from what is recognized as the truth, so to speak, and that would be in the West, in the Christian West, the Bible. So, for example, like Confucius, who lived 500 years before Jesus and lived in a part of the world that Jesus never personally visited, as far as we know. The fact that he is writing about things that speak to the lessons that are being taught by Jesus in the New Testament and conveying many of the same principles that are being conveyed by Jesus in the New Testament, and are later conveyed by Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers, who were, for the most part, self-identifying Christians. Thomas Jefferson, a little bit more of a libertarian, and a little more of a free spirit, so to speak. His peers accuse him of being an atheist, of course. But I think people are very quick to look at somebody like Confucius and say, well, that's a subversion of the Bible. Like, we shouldn't even look at that. You shouldn't look at like these other cultures and see where they are tapping into that same human principle that the Bible taps into and that Jesus taps into. And I think if you really step back and you look at humanity as one thing, as opposed to these tribes of different people who are actually different animals and different species, which is what I think a lot of these mystery cults try to trick us into thinking, right? And you think about what Jesus did. I mean, one of the most profound things that Jesus did as the leader of this new growing idea was to tell his followers, who were all Jewish, the Jews are not the chosen people. The chosen people are the people who choose to follow me. Those are the chosen people. And he went to the Decapolis, the Greek cities, and he preached to the Gentiles. And his followers were like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you preaching to the Gentiles? Why are we not focused on the Jews who are suffering and saving their souls?" And he said, "Because I'm here to save everybody. I'm not here to just save the Jews. I'm here to save everybody." And that was a revolutionary idea that really pissed off the Jewish elite, the Pharisees, who became the villains of the New Testament,
right?
And the people who ultimately murdered Jesus. And so if you take that concept and you apply it like at the macro level in the modern world, and look at the world and humanity as one thing, and not to buy into like the globalist thinking of like we're gonna like amalgamate all cultures into one gray like boring culture, but to look at everybody pursuing the same truth, or the same pursuit rather of truth. Obviously, other cultures who are earnestly pursuing truth and this transcendent these transcendent ideas are going to tap into that same idea, that same like energy, that same life force that is God, and they're gonna lock into that and say, well, treating each other with respect and dignity and humanity is like an act, like a divine act, and that is what we should pursue at all times. And that's what Jesus said. And it's like, so obviously you're going to see these lessons long before Jesus was around, written down in other parts of the world, and we shouldn't ignore that stuff and dismiss it because it didn't come from what Christians would consider, the highest truth, in the Bible. So I think we've been conditioned the same way in the modern world to look at these other cultures and dismiss them as inferior, Russia, China, Iran, whatever, rather than looking at, well, Persia 2,000 years ago was a pretty advanced place, and they had some pretty interesting things going on there, hundreds of years before Jesus was even alive. And we should absolutely be looking at that stuff and learning from it and understanding the lessons that they had learned through hardship and trial and error, and the failed pursuit of perfection, which is the human condition.
Absolutely, dude. No, I think it's in Romans, right? I don't know which book of Romans, or letters to the Romans by Paul, which made the point that the truth is written in the hearts of all men. And you got the same thing in the book of Jeremiah as well in the Old Testament, the same kind of lesson that the truth is written in the hearts of all people in its own wording. And you've got that in. I mean, that's the thing, right? There's this idea that even I recall this from Sunday school, right? That the Good Samaritan, right? So Jesus is dropping these axiom busting lessons to people who have a certain prejudice about the superiority of their particular moral philosophy about a Samaritan who's seen as a heathen from those who are receiving his sermon, who turns out to be the most noble character in that story, even more so than these holy men, going through this very dangerous pass and seeing this person who's bleeding out. And it's this person who most of his audience thinks of as being the enemy. That is the most virtuous character, demonstrating that they're actually more in harmony with God's law and God's intention than these holy men. So yeah, you find it if you look for it, if you have eyes to look for it, you will find that in so many of these sacred texts that have been passed down throughout ancient civilizations that have allowed them to endure and overcome so many points of crisis. And whether it's India, they've got their deep history, deep. I mean, we're talking, 5,000 BC, and probably a hell of a lot earlier. But there's as far as known surviving texts, indicating the Vedas, the Mahabharatas, the Upanishads. There's a variety of things that we have access to that gives us an insight into the types of ideas, often wrapped up in allegory and stories, that shape the moral culture of people who at different times got more free, where you've seen bursts of progress, of beauty, beautiful architecture and discoveries and longevity increasing at certain moments. And then you have the inversely periods of decay, of division, discord, forgetting past accomplishments. In all cultures, people can actually, this is open to objective examination. And then we could see that there's a certain common denominator, whether we look at the population collapses of the Warring States period of China, or the period before the Tang Dynasty revived the Silk Road in 618 AD. That's when the Silk Road, after it had collapsed for 400 years, was revived. But during that period of collapse, it was discord, new governments every few decades. It was constant wars, warlords, corruption. The population collapsed. It became a shadow of itself until you had a renewal, or a Renaissance period under the Tang period. But that didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened also at a period when you had the Muslims of the Abbasid dynasty, who were called upon in a time of crisis of the Tangs when they were going into civil war again. And it, early on, there was, in the 8th century, a danger of all of that, those steps of progress being lost again. And the Muslims came in, the Abbasid dynasty, the father of Harun al-Rashid, deployed 5,000, a small army, but a significant one, of 5,000 Muslim soldiers to go to aid the Chinese Tang leadership to put down its civil war. And they were rewarded in gratitude with land in the west of China, which became the foundation of Muslim China today, which is the Uyghurs. That's where it comes from, because the Muslims were asked upon and did intervene and save China at a time of crisis. And they knew that was also in their own good, because they needed the Silk Road, the driving force of economic development, of intercultural dialogue, was the Silk Road that the Tangs had revived. And the Abbasids, who gave rise to the schools of wisdom, the houses of wisdom that welcomed Jewish and Christian and Hindu and Buddhist and Muslim scholars to come together and carry out astronomy, to work on poetry, work on translations of Greek, Roman, Sanskrit texts. That was that. Those houses of wisdom were sort of like the more advanced academies of Plato that peppered the Muslim world. And there were similar things being developed under Charlemagne's advisor. Charlemagne was working closely as part of, his Christian Europe. His grandfather, and then his father, and then him, developed these beautiful bonds of cooperation with their Muslim counterparts, which allowed for the Silk Road to emerge all the way into Europe and through the Jewish kingdom as well of Khazaria, which is, by the way, going to be something I'm going to be publishing on Badlands Media pretty soon.
Nice.
So you've had this Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Confucian, Buddhist conjunction of civilizations that were able to work together. And in each of these societies that we look at today, in hindsight, we could find what coincided with this political conjunction was an avoidance of war, increase of beautiful art and architecture, increase of longevity, a clampdown on corruption, massive clampdown on sort of proto deep state structures, and the oligarchy that had been trying to get everybody to kill everybody in a clash of civilizations lost their power to manipulate those events through this type of beautiful ecumenical diplomacy, and not the type of lame ass, Jesuitical ecumenicism that we're being fed in our modern society, right? Of just like, let's homogenize everybody to just have a big kumbaya and get rid of any cultural distinguishing characteristics of Christianity and Muslim and Jewish and other faiths into a big mystical smorgasbord of
Just
feelings.
merge it all into one religion, which is, by the way, like what the Antichrist is like described as doing, is like in the Bible is like, oh, he's going to merge all like he's going to call for the emergence of all religions into one thing. And it's like, that's evil. It's evil. And it's about centralizing control, obviously, and ruling humanity. And that's all very, very well said. Chris Paul from Badlands we've been speaking in private chat, and he's had a great he's been on this for a while now, the whole unity call for unity, which is something that I have participated in to various degrees, like with writings like the horseshoe theory. And that's the idea of like people who once identified as leftists or communists or whatever, understanding that what they perceive to be the enemy is in line with what people on the right would also perceive to be the enemy. This is the same thing, like the same concept of tyranny coming after you. It's just you're seeing different faces of it depending on what your bias is, right? Like you're going to view it as like the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was made up of left-wing activists, people who, I mean, there was a guy, Eric Cason, on Rug Pull Radio last week, who described himself as like a former communist and like a former like anarchist who was in Central Park at the Occupy Wall Street movement, and he was like, "Man, I was so wrong about how I viewed the world." And then he went on to become like a Bernie bro, and then eventually he supported Donald Trump. But his journey to get there was very different from other people's journey, but they all arrived at the same conclusion, and that's through different paths. But he, at the time, like recognized Wall Street and the bankers as the problem, and the corporatists as the problem, for different reasons that he now recognizes them as the problem. It's like those, and it's because of the way his perspective and the way he was taught and the way he viewed the world. And so what this whole call for unity is, it's actually very subversive, because in this like emerging MAGA movement, the call for unity is basically the suppression of discussion, the suppression of conversation, the suppression of criticism, and kind of like shut up and trust what they're doing, shut up and trust the plan, shut up and trust that these people are looking out for your best interest, unify behind these new leaders. And it's like, that's not what unity is. Unity is the ability for parties to come together and hash out their differences through dialogue and debate. And if you aren't comfortable with that, then you're actually not unifying. You're submitting yourself. You're bending the knee to tyranny. You're bending the knee to a higher secular authority. And that's the subversive nature that Chris Paul warns with these calls to unity. So I think we should recognize that unity is really about recognizing common interests and common enemies, and not about submitting ourselves intellectually or ethically to higher secular authorities.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and that's how all of society has moved forward. It's not like it's so simple, and in a certain way, it's such a simple, obvious thing. And you could see it even in like those countries that were first targeted for regime change in the Middle East, whether it's, Iraq or Iran or Syria. Like look at Syria. You've got a giant Christian Orthodox community there, significant. You got Jews living there a lot. You got a lot of Muslims of different stripes. You got Sunnis, you got Shia, you got Alawites, who are something a little bit more confusing. But anyway,
Lots of Christians, or there at least there used to be, but I mean, there still are plenty of Christians there, but lots of Christians historically
Yeah.
in Syria and Lebanon. I mean, the Lebanese
Yeah.
flag, that tree on the Lebanese flag is a Christian symbol.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you could just, when up until, the recent ouster of Bashar al-Assad, there was, I would follow, I mean, I still follow Vanessa Beeley's account. She's a good friend, and she lived in Syria for up until the recent coup. And she would post Christmas photos of Muslim imams and Christian priests celebrating Christmas together with Christmas trees. It's like, and it's not like the Muslims thought that they were inferior to the Christians, or they probably thought that they thought that their religion had superiority to the Christians, and the Christians thought that their religion had superiority to the Muslims, but they were friends and loved each other. And that's what was key, is that they were able to see what was beautiful in each other's worldview and in each other's hearts and minds, and still could agree that we have differences, but we can all love each other and care about our offspring and work towards common ends, as you just pointed out, which we all need water. We all want peace. We all want a better life for our kids. We're all going to die. And we can, and there was this good, this guy, Gotthold Lessing, in the beautiful German philosopher and poet, in the 18th century. And he had a story, where he featured a dispute that occurred between like a Jew and a Christian and a Muslim, and who, which one had the better religion. And ultimately the moral of the story was to put this debate aside and revisit it in 1,000 years and see which one of those religions was able to solve hunger and war more effectively, and then come back and talk about it. But until then, just focus on the issues, focus on the fight against evil, and deal with these details later on after our kids have an insured future. And when people do that, we're always able to remove the power of the oligarchy and create better situations. So all that to say, I think that this, we have a little bit of time for some geopolitical analysis that I think weaves into some of this philosophical discourse we've been engaged in.
Before, so
Yeah.
I say let's do an ad read. I'm
Yeah.
gonna step away. I'm gonna step away for a quick second while you do that. But before we do that, I just want to respond to what you said, because what you said was brilliant. It's worth pointing out, in the absence of, let's just use Islam as an example. In the absence of Islam, Christians will still find a way to hate and kill one another. And just look at the history of Central Europe, over like Western/Central Europe, and I'm referring to Italy and Germany specifically, over the past 600 years. And Italy representing Catholicism, and Germany representing Protestantism, and the whole Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. 50 million Protestants, by the way, killed by the Vatican. 50 million. So, and now I think a lot of people, like in the greater context of like the religious conflicts that are happening around the world, would look at the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism as relatively minor compared to the differences between other religions. But it's like back then it was everything. And then you look at like the history of Britain and what was happening in Britain with the Church of England and the other Protestant faiths there. And and then the differences between Spain and England, and the Spanish Armada of 1588. It's like there are so many just examples of this stuff happening within the religions. I mean, look at Shia and Sunni Islam. I mean, it happens no matter what, because it is the nature of humans to fall into conflict when the communication breakdown occurs. And if it's not a very, very polarized, clear cut dichotomy, it'll become, it will become polarized on a much more micro level, on something like the difference between two different sects of Protestant Christianity, right? So that's just the human condition. That's the history of humanity. And I think we have to recognize that no matter what, those differences can be exploited for individual gain.
Yeah. And I want to partially say something to what you just said, because that's how this works. But I also noticed that you said you have to get something done quickly.
Yeah. I'm gonna step away and address something.
Right.
I'll be back. I should be back by the time you're done. But if I'm not, just can carry on.
All right, will do. Yes, sir. Okay, here we go. Ad read number 2 coming up, folks. Black Trust IRA. Yeah, it's funny. Somebody just said something about somebody said something in the chats about just check out Ireland. Now I'm sure that that's a different IRA from what we're about to experience, but I just found that funny. Okay, so here we are. Okay. It's been said that there would be a new energy force in finance. Today, we believe it's here. BadlandsCrypto.com, in partnership with Trust IRA, offers a secure path to convert your IRA or cash to cryptocurrency, protected by a revolutionary AI technology called Animus. Unlike meme coins or scams that prey on the faithful, the patriots at Trust IRA offer real managed accounts with AI Animus technology that navigates the market with computer-based precision, reducing the risk of volatile cryptocurrency markets. Animus AI Technologies was named the #1 crypto trading strategy in the world in 2023 by Bitcoin Magazine. Clients across the globe are utilizing this technology with their own accounts to outperform the market. Whether you have a retirement account like a 401k or IRA, just cash savings sitting in a bank, making you little to no interest. With best-in-class military-grade technology, Trust IRA's clients are 100% insured for up to $200 million. In fact, at badlandscrypto.com, they are so confident in their ability to help you succeed that for a limited time, they are offering up to a $2,500 bonus in crypto when you open an account. Visit badlandscrypto.com and find out how they can help you out return the best performing asset of the decade. That's badlandscrypto.com. Okay, so very different IRA. My hypothesis was true. Very different IRA. But that being said, I love the points. This was an unexpected philosophical discourse that you guys ended up experiencing today, and it's probably going to continue in a different format when Gordon returns. But oh, there he is. Okay, yeah. So we just read the ad. The
Awesome.
thing that had struck me when you had spoken just now. Damn it, I just lost it. It'll come back later, but that's okay. Oh yeah, that was it. That was it. I got it.
Okay.
I love that point, that even if you remove the Islam from the equation, Christians will still find some excuses to kill each other, as has been the case, unfortunately, for so many centuries. Now, you could say that with anybody, and the Muslims killing Muslims. You made that point too. Jews killing Jews. That's also recorded in history. Yep. Go on.
The Peloponnesian Persian Greco Wars. So everyone's probably seen or heard of the movie 300, and that was when the Battle of Thermopylae, when the Greeks stood up to the Persians, and preserved Western culture, which then went on to spread to Rome and later to Europe, and then eventually America and Canada. That represented all of Greece, Sparta, and Athens. These two cultures that were in conflict, with Athens representing democracy and Sparta representing more of like an oligarchical monarchy, and a much more militant society, almost like a fascist society, where the state was valued over the individual and everyone existed to serve the state. They put aside their differences to come together after the Battle of Thermopylae, when the Spartan king and his 300 bodyguards went and held off the Persians, with a couple hundred others helping them. That inspired the whole nation to then come together and fight the Persians at the Battle of Marathon, and ultimately fend them off. Well, what was it? 70, 80 years later, we then get the Peloponnesian Wars, where Athens and Sparta are engaged in a very intense, heated war where they're destroying each other all over again. So it's like once the Persian threat was removed, and it was like, oh great, we did it, hug it out, guys, like we're all friends now. Well, within one lifetime, they were right back to killing one another, and it was over the clash of culture and the differences, the very, very significant differences between Spartan culture and Athenian culture.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, that's partially here. I can actually say something compositionally based on what you just said, that you watered some seeds in my the soil in my brain. It's a weird allegory. Anyway, so let's just see where that goes. But the thing there that shaped up was number one, that kind of touched on exactly what we began speaking with at the beginning of the show, regarding the dichotomy of the two opposing approaches to dealing with problems, socially speaking, which is the bottom up versus top down. And in the case of Sparta, which was sort of characterized by its constitution that was generated by the pseudo mythical figure of Lycurgus, right? Lycurgus, who came a little bit before Solon. Some of the details of his life have been a little bit lost, but there's been enough that's been maintained that we know that this man had a certain idea, a certain, perhaps an authentic, noble, and I won't say noble, but an authentic intention to try to create an organized society where all of the moving parts would harmonize with themselves. There's many moving parts in every government, in every society, divisions of labor, right? Different functions of the legal system, the hospital system, the health systems for the health for the mind, the body, and the soul, right? Education, hospital, nutrition, the religious institutions, the temples, right? Each one's supposed, in theory at least, in its functional form, is supposed to cater to the health of each of the three functions or aspects of the human condition. I guess you could also add to that the arts from the healthy standpoint that we've been talking about would also probably play into the spiritual health of a society. You have the religion, you have the aesthetical education of the people through the plays, which all is supposed to work together. Now, Lycurgus, unfortunately, had a sort of misanthropic view, a very cynical view of what those humans were that made up the system that he was trying to organize. And he saw human beings kind of like animals to be trained under a master class. And so he organized all of society in a very communistic-y, militaristic fashion, right, around a master slave type of structure, and everybody ate the black soup, right? That was everyone had to eat the black soup. It was disgusting, but they got used to it. And it was very tribal. But, it had certain virtuous aspects. Like certain virtues did blossom as far as heroism in battle and ability to overcome fear was very admirable. But it was more disjointed and it was much more top down. There's no regard for the idea of the sacredness of the individual. So the arts didn't really blossom in Sparta. There was no case like in Athens, a sister Greek state, very sort of had a lot of similarities.
Yep.
But in Greek, in where Solon's constitution animated the fabric of the people, there you had Sophocles, you had Euripides, you had Aeschylus, you had
The philosophers,
the philosophers galore, right? And the playwrights and the poets who emerged, and there you had a lot more. Solon believed in more of the sanctity of the individual. And so he allowed for more freedom, knowing that the freedom of the individual to make decisions was necessary for the society to have validity. And thus, the key thing that Solon created that made this all kind of work, I guess we're talking here like 590, like a century before the Battle of Marathon in like 490. But this is like 590 when Solon came into a situation where like 90% of Greece had become debt slaves. They were owned by the oligarchical class. They lost their written script. There's no written works that have survived because they went into a dark age for a couple of centuries. Probably had something to do with what Homer talks about in the Odyssey and the Iliad, as far as a certain absurd war managed by oligarchical gods, or oligarchs passing themselves off as gods to get a war in the Black Sea region around Troy. The story of the Trojan horse. There does seem to be evidence that this really did happen, and this was at the heart of this self-destruction of that high level of culture. So anyway, Solon's coming into this situation where it's a dark age. There's not a lot to work with. Everybody's enslaved, and he's trying to figure out how do we break this. And he introduces a new constitution. And Greece, kind of like America today, is in a total, there's no sense of a future, and they're desperate for somebody with a bit of competence. So he finds a situation where he's now given some leadership responsibilities, and he introduces a major reform with the help of some allies. And so he brings in an abolition of debt slavery. He liberates the debt slaves. He reorganizes all of the society around the Areopagus. The Areopagus is sort of the cultural the cultural aristocratic sort of council that organizes the arts. And the arts are not like they are today. It's not for entertainment. It's like the idea the arts are much more sacred, and they're promoting certain works like what we see with Sophocles in the Oedipus trilogy. Oedipus Tyrannus and just reading the stories, you could see like exactly what I was talking about with these Chinese tragedies. In our modern day, that's exactly what you get with these tragedies that are being promoted to really educate and mature the souls of the citizenry to understand what life is really about, by looking at where things go wrong. How do the gods, who people like Solon and Sophocles and Aeschylus, they understood that the gods was of Olympus, right, were really just oligarchical families trying to keep and subdue the slave class to make them believe that we're just lowly mortals with no ability to possibly challenge the immortals. And that was like a real thing that was intellectually locking us in. And so they would showcase stories that had the gods behaving in a depraved, absurd way, organizing wars, making good people destroy themselves, just to like get people to become more critical about what is the nature of the high priest class that was organizing society to go into imperial wars, to lose its ability to survive and to go to backstab their neighbors. So in there, you had more of a balance between a top-down but also bottom-up orientation, where they were really, really cherishing the idea that individuals who achieved spiritual maturity could thus self-govern, and that's why Athens became the fountain of democracy as we know it. The idea that the people could organize from among themselves representatives to speak for the people, right? This also is what fed into Rome, in its early days when it abandoned and overthrew the system of kings, and it became a republic, which endured for like 3 centuries. And it was all based on the idea that you have a consul, not an overlord, not an emperor, not a hereditary thing, but a consul elected from among the people, senators who are elected from among the people. And that the people have thus a responsibility to constantly engage in that process. And it was only when they allowed sophistry into their society to make, again, the false appear true and the true appear false. That's the art of utilizing emotional manipulation, rhetoric tied to a rejection of ontological truth, right? Where truth just becomes the rule of the right of the mighty, who can impose their will onto the system that they want to manipulate. That becomes the new definition of truth, right? That's the Nietzschean Hitlerian idea of truth of I am the Übermenschen, I have the will to power, I can impose my definition onto the system, and thus it's true. Not because it's true because God's creation has any say in the matter. It's just because I will it. Thus, implicitly, I am God, in that view. So the sophistry, when that began to contaminate the minds of the Greeks, they did exactly what you described. They lost the mandate of heaven and they declined into empire. They became increasingly satraps, tools of an elite, a hereditary aristocracy that was built into, at the time, Babylon, Persia had taken control thus of this area. Same thing for Rome. They killed Cicero. They killed their all of the qualified leaders who were acting as consciences for the people were thus allowed to be killed. They did the same thing later on to Jesus. Men of conscience who were standing up to evil and showing people what real courage and wisdom was were allowed to be killed. Socrates was killed.
I was going to say Socrates. Yeah. The parallels between Socrates and Jesus are almost mind blowing when you think about the fact that they were both basically accused of corrupting the youth, of corrupting the population with their ideas, and they were both arrested by their government, and they were both given the opportunity to repent and basically denounce what they were teaching, and both of them say, no, I'd rather die. And they were both executed by their government for refusing to denounce the only truth that they knew. And it's amazing that they lived centuries apart. And a lot of people don't know this about Socrates, but he was actually like a badass warrior, or like at the age of 50, he was a hoplite, which is like the guy with the like 300, the guy with the spear and the shield, who is known for saving on 3 different occasions, saved like significant figures by breaking the ranks. Because if you remember the movie 300, the hoplite survive by maintaining their formation and protecting the guy next to you. He breaks the rank, runs forward, and drags somebody who was about to be killed back behind the lines. And like, obviously, if you're 50 years old and you're doing this, you're fighting against 20-year-old men. you're like in amazing physical condition. So he's not known for that, but that is absolutely true, that he was like very, very physically fit. He was all about like fitness, like a fit body is a fit mind. So, you know, interesting, just a little wrinkle about Socrates, but yeah. And then you can talk about Sparta and Athens. I mean, we are far more connected to the Athenians than we are Sparta, in terms of like the rich culture and the idea of the individual over the state. In the movie 300, I keep going back to that, but just because it's a very strong cultural reference, the Spartans mock the Athenians for being poets and being artists, and that's because that was very, very valued in their culture. Whereas in Sparta, you know, the term laconic, which means to be very a man of few words, that's because the peninsula that Sparta is located on is called Laconia. And so if you are a laconic person, that means you are a man of very few words, which, you know, used to be in the days of the writer whose name escapes me. It's like Hemingway. It's like a man of few words. It's like, that's the masculine ideal. And that goes back to Sparta. So, you know, it's just, there's these connections. The ancient Greek world is a fascinating place, and there's so much you can learn if you go and you dig into it. And it's, yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to sidetrack what you were saying.
Nah, dude. That's totally, it's fine. And I mean, honestly, like this has so much relevance to understanding today's dysfunctional world in so many ways, because like when you look at how did our what made America work was the citizen soldier, right? The soldier who, like in the case of the ideal of Cincinnatus of the Roman Republic, who was able to be, who was a great general, had the power of essentially the consul, who was brought in to become an emergency consul of Rome, and a leader of the military of Rome in a time of major crisis, was able to then return back and become, like, he was retired. He was a farmer, and he was brought in because he had the expertise, he had the knowledge to save Rome in a time of crisis. And then instead of utilizing that power as he could have done to reward his friends and punish his enemies and become an uber rich man, he chose to go back and return back to the farm, you know, in a humble estate, knowing that his conscience was satisfied and he lived out his years as a happy man. But that's the ideal of the Society of the Cincinnatus, which was the society that was set up by George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette and Alexander Hamilton in the wake of the American Revolution, in order
Patrick Henry did the same thing, by the way. He was offered like every position, including the Supreme Court justice by George Washington, and he turned down every opportunity to be in the federal government, including being president, to go back to his farm, serve in the Virginia. He was a Virginia governor, but then Virginia legislature, and just be a lawyer, take care of his family, hang out with his kids.
Yeah, Washington too, right? The man, all he wanted to do after he fought the revolution is he just wanted to be a farmer. And they had to fight with him to just, it's like, no, we need you, man. No one else can do it. And but you could see, like, he was animated by something much higher than that. He had much more self-respect and dignity. And I think that gets at the solution to the problem of, like, well, what do you do when there's no enemy, when there's no Islam to unite the Crusaders in a common battle against the other, right? Or what's there to stop the Christians from falling into tribalism and have different factions killing factions, or, you know, Shia killing Sunni or whatever. It's know thyself. Like, that was the key theme of Socrates and Confucius's teachings, and it's all over the New Testament, is self-examination, know yourself, examine your heart, examine your mind all the time, be humble, right? So that humility that comes with discovering that what we thought we knew was actually a preconceived prejudice that was founded on something foolish that we should feel a little bit stupid for. You know, that's part of the beauty of being human. We're constantly discovering that we thought we knew things, we assumed things, we were wrong. And so now that we're self-aware of what we don't know, we're in a better place to discover something that is truer than what we formerly had thought to be true that was false. Which is why Socrates, in the Apology, on the very, you know, when he's making his so-called apology, which is not really an apology at all, he's making the point that, look, I'm not saying that I have special knowledge or that I'm better than anybody. I'm just simply saying that word got around that I was, like, really, really wise. I didn't believe that was true, but I started testing it out by going to the experts in politics and the experts in law and having public debates with them to see what do they know. And I discovered by asking them questions that these experts actually didn't really know what they thought that they knew. And so to that extent that at least I know that I don't know, they thought that they knew what they actually don't know, which put them in a worse place than me. And I'm in a better place because I'm at least free to make a discovery and they're not. And young people were kind of liking this process and started replicating it and doing that to other experts, which made me a lot of enemies because now all of it is like, you know, these young admirers of Socrates who are like sick of living in a hypocritical world of corruption were actually finding that there was a way to communicate, which actually gets at what you were talking about with how do we communicate with, like, oftentimes we get demoralized because we're like living and walking in normie land. And it's difficult knowing these, like having worked through a lot of conspiracies, a lot of ideas that show us a very different kind of reality, coloring and shaping the topography that we're moving through. Whereas most people that we seem to interact with seem to believe the official lines that are lies about what is causing our society to be what it is. They're, you know, what might be considered, derogatorily speaking, in different degrees of normism, as the term has come to be known. Not even that there's as many normies as you would think, as we discovered in Canada, where everyone thought that they were like an isolated island of critical thinking before the Freedom Convoy back in I guess now I'm losing my sense of time, a few years ago. But all of a sudden everyone discovered that they're not an island and everybody else is insane. There was like 7 million Canadians, and Canada is a very small, quantitatively speaking. There's like, you know, 38 million people. It's not very big, but like 7 million people physically got out across all the provinces to champion. Even people who were injected were like, this tyranny is wrong. I'm going to give my support to this process. And all of a sudden everyone discovered that their neighbor, the guy who worked at the coffee shop, everyone had a very common view that they were all self-censoring because they were taught to believe that they're an island, that they're alone, that they're the fringe minority of bigots and misanthropes that or little fascists that Justin Trudeau had said that we were. And then all of a sudden we're like, no, we're not alone. But all that to say, to go out of your shell, that's what these young people admiring Socrates were doing. They were like, I don't have to just attack bad ideas, and I don't have to just run away from bad ideas and just go into my own little micro shell, and I don't have to be a faker, but I can just be a pleasant person like Socrates is. Socrates is always very cordial in his dialogues. He's very respectful, but he's very funny, and he knows that underlying the particular words being said by anybody in any conversation, there's a deeper unexamined axiom, kind of like at the root of the tree. So he's always working to get through the branches deeper and deeper to the core root, the core axioms that are sort of like a hereditary principle of the mind, binding all of the words that are being said on the surface area, so that this is where the meat and potatoes of his dialogues resides, is in the skill of utilizing paradoxes, figuring out what somebody says when they're like, well, what is justice? Justice is, I'll give you my hypothesis. It's the ability to destroy your enemies and reward your friends. And he's like, oh, that's a hypothesis. Let's test it out now. And now let's look at some examples of where that breaks down. And then the whole thing is a fun exposition where these experts start self-destructing under the weight of their own self-contradictions because they didn't self-examine their axioms. They didn't examine their hearts. Whereas when people do that, they start overcoming all of these manipulative tribal narratives that get us to go inward in a bad emotional way, and to only start talking to people who already think like us and have the opinions that we do. And as soon as we get into that Facebooky type of like social media land, and we lose the ability to be human, to like go out and use just dignified reason and humor to speak with people who might have different thoughts and opinions than we do, and do it respectfully, but yet still be prepared to challenge the wrong, to be able to challenge lies. So yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful process in many ways.
It's the suppression of the human spirit. It's the loss of the human spirit. And to your point, I mean, what I think Socrates' most famous line, or the one that's most commonly stated, is, the only thing I know for certain is that I know nothing. And that was his attitude. And then that led to him asking questions, which is people now recognize as the Socratic method, It's like just
Mm.
ask questions. That's the best way to educate somebody, is rather than sitting there and lecturing them and like pounding information into their head, is to ask them questions where they like to generate a curiosity into them and plant that curiosity into them. And then they want to go out and solve the question, like solve the, like, because then that question will spur more questions. And then from there, the branches will grow, and then they'll want to pursue that knowledge. And then, it becomes a plant in and of itself. And then, you mentioned that he was challenging these people, these so-called experts, and making fools of them. And that ultimately became kind of the crime that he was guilty of committing, was making fools of the leaders. And that's why they killed him, of course. And I mean, who does that remind you of from the current situation? I mean, that sounds a lot like Donald Trump, like who, presented paradoxes, presented these hypocrites that are in front of us saying things, and it turns out they're presenting us with paradoxes. They're saying things they don't actually mean. They're saying one thing and doing the other, and they're presenting themselves as false saviors to, but when really they're working for the enslavers. And that's ultimately why they wanted to destroy him. And they want to stop him, is because he represents something that's much more in tune with the human spirit than anything the American government has pursued over the past, 75 years plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I this is great. This is really good. I figure let's maybe do this. I've got till about 2:00. Do you have about another half hour? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's maybe like run through a couple of points on this. Now I just got back from Thailand with Cynthia. And I'll just say a couple things there, and then we can maybe like branch out. Sure. One thing that I wanted to showcase that inspired me quite a bit is I was privy to a couple of conversations with certain people who were organizers of very important diplomatic channels, which were behind, for those who may not know, the Belt and Road Initiative is otherwise known as the New Silk Road. I inferred earlier in today's show to the Silk Road of the Tang Dynasty. That was the revival of the first Silk Road that had animated the Han Dynasty between 200 BC and 200 AD. The idea of animating a society around win-win cooperation, intercultural dialogue, sharing of discoveries, as well as spices and silk and other things. But that was like something that it took the oligarchy some centuries. They finally were able to destroy this process. I think the conversion of Rome from a republic into an empire played a role in this destruction of this inter-civilizational cooperation. But it was revived with the Tang Dynasty, and we talked about that a little bit, and then it went sort of fallow. It really collapsed, with the Crusades again and the Muslim, Christian, Jewish wars that plagued the world for centuries. It had a little bursts of mini revivals, but it was always kind of suppressed. There was never really the conjunction of civilizational states that was sufficient to revive it in a proper way until 2013, when Xi Jinping announced that the New Silk Road was going to be what would animate China's foreign policy, and it would bring in, I think, about 140 to this day signatories, different states that agreed to cooperate on varying degrees with the Silk Road process that defined banking, defense strategy, cultural policy around a very different idea from the Hobbesian militarism that had turned the West from being that citizen soldier ethos that allowed us to win World War II, was again the citizen soldier, into a more Spartan. I mean, that's really the thing that took over the USA after World War II, was the infusion of a Spartan revisionism into our military doctrines, following the guidelines of Samuel P. Huntington, who's Soldier in the State. Explicitly, this is the guy who wrote Clash of Civilizations, which became national foreign policy under the Trilateral Commission. The same Samuel P. Huntington who was a disciple of Zbigniew Brzezinski. This guy wrote The Soldier in the State, calling explicitly for the conversion of the U.S. military into a explicitly Spartan-oriented mercenary class.
The career soldier, right?
The career soldier, right? The man who is born to be the soldier, who's trained at almost birth to be a warrior only and nothing but that for life, birth to death. And the idea of a citizen soldier, the farmer soldier who could turn his sword into a plowshare, that was over with under the Samuel P. Huntington logic, which again became national foreign policy. And we saw it especially under the fires of the Vietnam War, where this was really driven forward. And you and I have talked about this many times. These Satanists like Michael Aquino, Edward Lansdale, Dr. John Alexander, who I'm quite convinced is Satanist, who was part of the leadership of the Phoenix program, that was like the most brutal killing machinery of the Vietnam War, directing the murder of like 40,000 people, mostly civilians, in torture murder campaigns. They're the ones who went and shaped Operation Condor in Latin America starting in the early 70s, that created an entire central command structure to put in place fascist tyrants and run torture murder campaigns and kidnapping programs under the rubric of the CIA, of this shadow agency that had managed, all of these Green Beret training grounds in Panama. And even to this very day, there's like 78 U.S. military bases all over Latin America. And this was like the application of the lessons learned and the powers developed in Vietnam over a decade is then they just applied it to all of Latin America. And they kept doing it under a new sort of veneer. But out of this came an emergence of exactly Samuel P. Huntington's ideal, which took over increasingly U.S. military command and strategy, especially throughout Desert Storm, Iran-Contra before that, and all the way to the present. So the Patriot philosophy was weakened heavily. So all that to say, this, what we've been talking about from 2,000 plus years ago, so relevant to understand this. Now, Xi Jinping announced the Silk Road as a response to this, and I would say probably the best beacon to restore our sensibilities in the West, to find our true selves again, to cooperate on these things. And so many offers were made to Canada, to the USA, to Europe, to just drop our militarism, to work on just finding common points of interest. And one of the things that we learned, I'm going to show a picture here. So this is a picture of me and a fellow, Mr. Paisal, who was an incredible fellow who has brokered so many interesting deals between Thailand and various other governments, as well as the private sector, around building Belt and Road infrastructure in Thailand. Because Thailand it's a monarchy, but not the same kind of monarchy as we have in Europe. It's a different kind of philosophy. It's a Buddhist philosophy, and their monarchy is not animated by the same sort of dystopic vision that the European overlord class is inclined to. But one of the things that he got across is that the high-speed rail network that was announced in Thailand in 2014 was sabotaged every single year after it was announced, because Thailand was supposed to be originally an integral part of the BRI in East Asia. And it was sabotaged again and again. There's a lot of corruption and Western control in their elected parliamentary part of their government. But when people saw that Laos, just a little bit beside Thailand, which was a lot poorer than Thailand, was able to build their own high-speed rail network, even though they started it in 2016. They finished it by 2020. The grid is done. They have way more high-speed rail than the U.S. and Canada combined. Canada and the U.S. has like hardly any. Laos, it's integrated. And then the population said, well, why are they, who are economically weaker, are able to do this and we're not able to? And there's so much pressure put that it really made it possible to get the revenue, to get the support to build. So now they're finally building it. It's going to be done by 2028. The first high-speed grid in Thailand, which will then right afterwards connect to Laos, which is connected to China, which is connected to the broader Eurasia. Now, one of the things he was showing us, and this is, Cynthia, my wife, and me and him and our excellent host, who is taking us through this very interesting seminar process. They showed us this grid here. So that's actually Mr. Paisal and our host featuring a map of something called the Craw Canal. And he was showing us this because I expressed my admiration for this beautiful project that I had heard about, because I had once been an organizer with the Schiller Institute many years ago, and I was organizing conferences in Ottawa around the Canal. And here's another picture of what this canal is. And I'll say something about this.
Wow.
I had thought that this thing was put to bed. There was an announcement in 1983 that the Thai government was going to build it. Here's actually what it looks like from here's actually a better version of it. So the canal, it was first announced. Here. So this is what it is. Basically, it's the yellow line here.
Yeah.
Shows a non-existent maritime trade corridor that would go through the South China Sea. There you have Cambodia, you got Vietnam, you got Laos above Thailand. And then a canal would be cut approximately 28 miles in length, shorter than the Panama Canal, that would then open up this new corridor that would help sort of the Straits of Malacca is what's currently in existence, right?
Yeah.
Something like 38% of all Chinese trade passes through there. Energy trade globally, it's like 42% of energy resources travel through the Straits of Malacca.
Yep.
It's highly congested. Although it looks pretty wide from this map, it's very shallow water, and only a very small portion of it is capable of allowing the large barges to move through, which require more than like an 80 feet depth. And so it's highly congested. It's a crisis, especially
and for those who don't know, there's 3 choke points in the world in maritime trade, and that would be the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, and the Strait of Malacca. Those are considered the 3 most important strategic choke points for maritime trade.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And this one is highly precarious because the U.S. military, I mean, there's currently 158,000 U.S. troops, a lot of bases, and I mean, I'll assume that this is a carryover from the Biden and neocon administrations that hasn't been dealt with, peppering all over Asia. You know, you got still Green Berets militarizing Taiwan, preparing to use Taiwan as a new Ukraine of the Pacific. You've got Philippines, which has several U.S. military bases that are very aggressive. You got South Korea also, that's being used by the U.S. military to prepare for an oncoming war with China that some forces with a little bit too much influence, I think, still believe has to happen. Malaysia's not fully sovereign. So it's precarious. You know, if something like this is destabilized, the Straits of Malacca, that could really destroy a lot of progress that's been built up in Asia. So this would help bypass that, and it would create sort of a hub, a driver of something that it would take like 10 to 13 years to build the canal. But then as he showed us, because I thought this was dead, I had done conferences that we featured this in Ottawa to delegates in 2012, 2013, 2014. But then as far as I knew, that was sabotage. Like, I thought this was a thing of the past. But then upon hearing us talking about our passion for this, which feeds into the high-speed rail network, right? It's the intersection of the sea-based and land-based parts of the Belt and Road. He calls his assistant to bring in these beautiful maps that he's commissioned with the assistance of some very interesting people who want to make this happen and have the capability. And he's looking for international investors to also participate. He has some from China. He has some investors from, I believe, well, I won't say any details right now, but he's got a lot of interest, but he wants to get more people from the USA, from Canada, from Europe, but especially the USA and Canada to participate, to create the foundation for, again, a harmonization of interests in something that will create billions of dollars of profit for any companies that engage in this. You're going to create a lot of profit. And what you have there would be the 2 canals, or the 2 aspects. One for east and the other for western flow of goods, with new special economic zones that he would build up, little industrial parks that would be built up, that would be a driving force to turn Thailand from a second world into a first world country fast. It has a lot of elements of being a first world country, but it's not there yet. And what you have on the bottom is the way it would be constructed from zone A, B, C, D, and then the middle E, basically indicating that, like the Transcontinental Railway built under Lincoln, you would start it from both sides and then merge and finish it in the middle in the E section. So you'd start from the A and start the cutting process inwards. This is actually the larger 140 kilometers. So it's bigger than the 28-mile stretch. That's another version. So this is like moving ahead faster than I thought. This is like in play. And it gave me a lot of inspiration because you have currently this very, very special way of thinking, but it requires that we let go of globalization, which gets at the other point that I wanted to just talk about quickly. You know, I shared with you today, we have the tariffs going into effect. A lot of people are freaking out. They're wetting their pants about how incompetent, terrible the tariffs are. If you listen, and whether you listen to Jeffrey Sachs, who's got some nice opinions on certain geopolitical criticisms that are perfectly reasonable that he puts out, but this guy is
he's a neocon. He's a neocon.
He's a neocon in disguise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Acting like he's a peacemaker, but he's really a hard neocon. He's a green eco-globalist who's absolutely committed to one world government to reduce world population to save the world from global warming, but to do that doing things that would conveniently for his masters have the effect of reducing world population through a variety of seemingly anti global warming agendas like the Green New Deal, which he's for. So all that to say, he's not to be trusted, but he's now coming out as one of the loudest voices criticizing the tariff policy. But as I made this is not at all. If it's done poorly, it could be a bad thing. Okay, I'll admit a tariff is not intrinsically a good. If you do it without thinking through certain facts of life, it could be done in a sloppy way. I'm not 100%, honestly, dude, I'm not 100% convinced that the people managing the U.S. tariff policy are doing it in the best way possible, but I don't know. I've just never seen it done this way before. All that to say, tariffs built our society. The only time America has ever progressed, or that China was able to get to the place of its industrial power that it could announce the Belt and Road in 2013, was because of a wise use of protective tariffs to favor the development of local industries that don't exist and could not exist if you simply had unbounded, unregulated free markets, allowing for the inflow of cheap goods that would undercut your local producers of whatever you wanted to build, because cheap goods could always just be flooded in to destroy your local market. That's the way the US was kept backwards for decades and decades before the American Revolution. It's the way the British Empire was able to maintain the world as a one world government for centuries, was through global free trade, so that its victims wouldn't have the wherewithal or means to protect themselves from the empire's ability to carry out economic attacks on their victims, flood the local goods of Ireland or India with cheaper stuff that would destroy their economy, or especially the Canada or the American states. So that's the name of the game. Now,
by the way, the Boston Tea Party was a tax on all tea except for tea from the East India Company. And the reason they did that was because the East India Company had a huge surplus of inventory of tea that was all about to go bad. It was all about to rot. They had to throw it away. So they panicked and said, all right, and the East India Company was in total dire straits in terms of its finances, because there was so much corruption and embezzlement from the people who worked there. So they imposed this tax on every tea, as basically a tariff on every tea except for East India Company tea. And that's why the colonists dressed up like Indians, got on the boat and threw the tea in the harbor. They were throwing East India Company tea into the harbor. So that's the story behind that anecdote.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. This is like the fight to exactly. This has been shaping all of our history. So I just wanted to share this with some of the audience. I totally forgotten that I had even written this thing, but then back in 2020, I'll just share this little thing here. I had written an article for Strategic Culture Foundation that I no longer. Thanks, man. And I revisited it, and I'm gonna actually just share this on my Substack. But yeah, if you actually go through it, I made the point that a wise decoupling, like I say in the article, might be a good thing for both China and the West, and this might be actually something which is prearranged from Trump's first term already, where the seeds were already being planted for getting rid of globalization in a way that would be harmonized amongst different nations, Russia, China, and the US especially, by restoring the right to utilize protective tariffs, because the US has allowed itself to be destroyed through a period of decay and attrition by becoming addicted to cheap crap from China. That was done by design by the same controllers of Samuel P. Huntington in the 1970s that were working under the Trilateral Commission to break the US dollar off of the gold reserve and to float the dollar onto the floating exchange rates, which resulted in something that I go through in this article in a quick way, which was to on the one hand create a false response to the Keynesianism that animated the U.S. economy and the world economy from 1945 up until 1971. And that Keynesianism, Keynes was somebody who was a British Fabian eugenicist, a proponent of one world government, somebody who Jeffrey Sachs says is his greatest hero. This Lord John Maynard Keynes was a Cambridge apostle, just like Lord Bertrand Russell, high level. And it was his theories, his garbage theories of economic behavior and human nature that was animating the Bretton Woods system after Franklin Roosevelt was dead and the British Empire concocted this Anglo-American special relationship around Truman, which was behind the creation of the CIA, the idea of the Truman Doctrine, the idea of turning the U.S. into like a Spartan martial lord for the British Empire, which was sort of the strategy of the Anglo-American special relationship, so that America was going to become the dumb beast that would be deployed as a weapon to destroy small countries through economic and military weight, as well as just everybody's dependence on the U.S. dollar. Because everybody had to have U.S. dollars, right, in order to carry out trade balances and other things as part of the Bretton Woods system. That's not intrinsically a bad thing. If the U.S. is behaving like a proper nation state that cares about its people and cares about always increasing its industrial and agricultural productive powers, if it's doing that, it's fine. But it's not. If it goes imperial, it becomes all of a sudden a weapon to keep nations down and backwards, which became the name of the game. So Keynesianism resulted in a stagnant structure where they were able to manipulate due to certain aspects of the fixed exchange rate under the GATT system. There were certain rigidities built into the system. The idea of like keeping gold prices stuck to like the 1931 or 33 values of $33 an ounce, that was absurd that they kept that going, even though in Europe, the gold values were allowed to increase to like $90 an ounce, which is very different from the prices in the US. So they were able to create, and I would say the City of London, Wall Street oligarchs were able to create, utilizing these price differentials and inconsistencies, bubbles built into the system that were then able to then be ruptured sufficiently that the US dollar could tank in a crisis in 71. And in that crisis, those people like George Shultz, Kissinger, other followers of the globalist school were able to say, okay, well, the solution is let's just float the US dollar. We'll remove it from the standards of the productive economy. And we're going to redefine what value is now more and more around speculation and making money with non-tangible assets, primarily consumer debts, national debts will become increasingly seen as assets that can be bundled, codified, gambled upon on spot markets, futures markets. And we're going to create a situation with things like the Garn-Saint-Germain Act in 1983 under Reagan that would facilitate liquidity to speculators, but at the same time as we're making it easier for speculators to gamble with money that they don't have and that money that doesn't even exist because it's not reflective in the real economy, we're going to contract the money supply for the commercial banks. So we're going to demand that commercial banks in a time of economic crisis between like 1978 and 82, we're going to demand that those banks have an absurdly high amount of reserves, of capital reserves in the banks in order for them to be allowed to lend out anything to the commercial, to people who want to start a business or whatever. So we're going to make it harder for real lenders to the real economy function. We're going to have a tight money supply at the same time as we're going to make money abundant for people who have non-productive forms of investment. So we're able to create, on the one hand, a massive bubble, and through this idea of deregulation, which came about because, as a solution to Keynes, well, the Austrian school is right there. Now, keep in mind, Friedrich von Hayek was a lifelong friend of John Maynard Keynes. Both of them were part of the same London School of Economics, Fabian Society apparatus, and they just had sort of a controlled gang counter-gang opposition. The school of Friedrich von Hayek were the leading economic courtiers of the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian empire. That's what this Austrian school, the Vienna school, but especially the Austrian school, were all a part of. And they created this debate saying, no, if you want to solve an economic crisis, Keynes said it's all top down. The state has to have all full control. People mean nothing. The Austrian school said, no. There's no role for the state. It's all about bottom up buying. People want to buy things, let them buy things, and cut all government spending, social spending, all infrastructure spending. Just cut that all. Get rid of the state. Just have people do their own initiative, and somehow the markets will work themselves out. Legalize drugs, legalize everything, which is what Milton Friedman also advanced in the 70s. So they were all saying no. Protectionism, that's evil, that's big bad state. And whether it's Lincoln or whether it's John F. Kennedy or whether it's Hitler, they're all using the nation state to do things, and thus they're all equally bad. They're all equally fascist. He didn't differentiate morality within that equation of like John F. Kennedy versus Hitler, and so that became Milton Friedman, who was a follower, a leading member of this Mont Pelerin Society operation that was part of the Heritage Foundation as well, which was brought into the United States to shape Ronald Reagan's entire economic policy outlook that basically had Reaganomics at the same time as they were bringing it into the UK under Thatcherism, which was basically, it was Austrian school, total deregulation, privatization of everything. And that was exactly what they did, is they basically allowed for massive mergers and acquisitions for these Bilderberger group interests to then take control, have more power than the nation state itself through things that created Monsanto, Chase Manhattan, these major banks that became too big to fail, these major corporations that had more power than, they want to have the power of gods to lord over nations, which they got in the 80s in the case of the Big Bang in the UK. That deregulated banking and allowed for all banking to happen under a one-stop shop, universal banking. That also was replicated in the USA under Alan Greenspan, who drove the destruction of Glass-Steagall, and that allowed for the thing that was separating commercial and investment banking. That all of a sudden that wall was torn down, and you could have these universal banks that could gamble for the first time since 1933 with people's savings, and that's what was behind the driving of things like the housing market, everything else. So this Austrian school thing was all about destroying protective tariffs, destroying the right of national banking, the right of parity pricing. And so now is the opportunity to get back to what was destroyed. What we were told we're not allowed to do is exactly what I'm seeing happening, as far as China is now having a retaliatory tariff, a big one, 89% or something against the US's tariffs that are now up to 110%. Is this a bad thing? Well, we'll wait to see the effects. But right now, if there's collaboration, which I hope there is, and I think there is, then this could be a very good thing for both countries to reassert the right of the nation to grow what has been destroyed, especially in the case of America. China's in a better place, but in the case of America, we got to grow back our industrial belt, our automotive sector, and other things. So I see here that you might want to show something that plays into this.
Yeah, real quick, because Ash asked me if I'd jump in to do some commentary with her on at 2:00. But so 1985, there's a great video that's out there that Chris Paul shared that shows like the top 10 companies on the, I want to say it's in the S&P 500 or on the Dow maybe, but it's the top 10 companies starting in 1971 till now. And it's like as it runs through, and it goes through each year very slowly, and it's like they all shift around. But in like the mid 80s, all of a sudden these Japanese companies come like storming in and just take over the top 10, and and then it balances out in the 90s. But you'll notice that the American companies that come in the 90s, but prior to that, it's like oil companies, car makers. It's companies that are very much like part of the manufacturing sector, and then all of a sudden, after the Japanese come in with their manufacturing sector in the 80s. And that was considered a great time of prosperity under Reagan, right? But that was also like when a lot of our manufacturing sector industrial sector was gutted and shipped over to places like Japan. And by the way, Donald Trump was on Oprah Winfrey talking about in the late 80s how Japan was eating our lunch and taking all of our manufacturing and then shipping all their VCRs back to America while having tariffs up, so we couldn't send our stuff to our cars to Japan. So Trump was talking about this literally as it was happening in the 80s, which is interesting. And then the companies that come in the 90s and, and supplant those Japanese companies are like Coca-Cola, like very like consumer, like retail based products as opposed to like manufacturing, right? I mean, Coca-Cola kind of like took over the world there for a minute. But it's just what you're getting at is exactly it. The decoupling is in my opinion, the strategic aspect of all this. I just saw, by the way, Kevin O'Leary, who I think he's on the right side of things. He's a fellow Canadian. I kind of view him as almost like he has a Trumpian way about him from the Canada perspective. He just proposed a 400% retaliatory tariff on China by the United States. So it's like, let's see how crazy we can get here with the decoupling. But I wanted to share this because I think this kind of captures the essence of what like the principle here. Rand Paul, I'm very disappointed in the way Rand Paul's approaching this because he's been like standing on the table screaming about how awful these tariffs are, not offering, in my opinion, honest, like intellectual arguments. He's basically just saying, I'm a free market capitalist. Tariffs are anti-free market. We should just let the free market play itself out. And the free market's the free market, and let the free market solve the problem. And the problem with that idea is that you are assuming, from an economic perspective, that the free market is one marketplace, like one economy, like the United States of America, right? The problem is that the United States of America, the laws that govern the United States of America only exist in the United States of America. They don't exist elsewhere. Congress cannot regulate the way business is done in China or Japan or anywhere else, which is why these oligarchs are allowed to go to places like Japan or China or Vietnam and create sweatshops and basically pay people pennies to do the job that they would be paying people in America $15, $20 an hour to do. And that's what allows them to create all these cheap goods and then flood our markets with them. It's effectively slave labor. It's effectively indentured servitude. And here's the argument that I would make, to help people understand it is that, we have laws in our country about slavery. We have laws in our country about indentured servitude, right? You're not allowed to own somebody like another human being. You're also not allowed to create contracts that are effective, that are indentured servitude, meaning like that they owe you a debt and therefore in exchange for alleviating that debt, they're going to basically be your slave for a short period of time. You can't do that. And there's nobody, by the way, arguing right now against that idea. Like in a quote unquote free market economy, that would all be allowed to happen. And that's the way it was allowed to happen 400 years ago. You could do those things. There was case law that was created in 1648 when a black slave owner who had 3 indentured white servants, they sued him to be released from their contract. And the judge, and this is in Virginia, and the judge looked at the contracts and said, you signed the contracts. The contracts are very clear. This guy owns you. You are his property until you work off these debts. And so nobody makes arguments against that right now because it's universally understood why slavery is bad and why like the underlying moral principles behind those laws are just inherent. Like it's understood why it's bad. The problem with the tariffs is that people don't understand, like I don't think the public's been educated to understand why tariffs are bad or why tariffs are good and what they're correcting, like the situation they're correcting. And so Rand Paul saying, well, free market capitalism, allowing free markets to prosper. So I responded to him by saying, stop flooding our markets with cheap goods made by slave labor in the third world. We have a right to protect our markets from predatory oligarchs, Rand. And then somebody responded, he quoted me saying, stop flooding our markets with cheap goods. This has to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read on the internet. Ha, 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 ha. We want cheap goods. That's how we raise the standard of living and become richer. Okay, so I want to address that point because I think that's a really, really stupid, like just a silly idea. I can debunk it immediately right now. So we saw over the past 4 years how hyperinflation, I mean, I don't know if I call it hyperinflation, but how inflation has driven up the cost of goods, right? Now, your wages haven't increased at the same rate, right? So like things are far more expensive than they were 4 or 5 years ago. And you can no longer afford the standard of living you had 4 or 5 years ago because of inflation, because of currency manipulation, and because of money printing and other factors. Like the cost of goods have gone up, your wages haven't gone up, and that's because you don't have a real economy. You have an economy based on speculative banking practices, like you just talked about. And so because of that, you are totally dependent under that guy's idea of like, we want cheap goods. Give us the cheapest goods. Yes, slave labor is okay. Give us the cheapest goods possible. The problem is that all it takes is one issue, your currency, to drive up the cost of goods. Your wages can't keep up, and suddenly you're in like an inverted upside down. You're upside down like in your mortgage. You're upside down in your standard of living. That's why real prosperity comes from real wages. Real prosperity comes from an economy that's based on making things, manufacturing things, and actually producing goods, as opposed to speculating and gambling with savings and with fiscal like financial instruments. And so that's why this whole idea is so silly. Is because in a true free market, as Rand Paul wants, oligarchs are going to come in and manipulate the system in order to subjugate the people, like at the expense of the people, which is why you have to have protections in place to protect marketplaces from those kind of like external forces, because these are external forces. Even if they're American citizens, they're still external forces. And it's such an obvious truth to me that like slave labor is not, like, I can't go out and start a slave farm here in my backyard and produce goods with slave labor and then take them to the marketplace and compete with those guys. Not that I would want to, but even if I wanted to, I legally can't. And that's why it's not a free market. It's actually a two-tiered system where only those with the resources and the like immorality are able to basically exploit the system, so.
Absolutely, dude. I couldn't agree with everything you just said more. I know you got to leave it, like you said, in a minute, right?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and like, if you have something you want to say.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Based on what you just said, I have to say the following thing. Okay, I'm going to read a quote from McKinley, and then we're going to play the ad. And if you have time for a question from the audience, that's great. If not, that's okay too. So here, I just got to read this. All right. William McKinley said upon fighting for the McKinley tariff of 1890, he said, "They say that everything would be so cheap if we only had free trade. Well, everything would be cheap, and everybody would be cheap. I do not prize the word cheap. It is not a word of hope. It is not a word of comfort. It is not a word of cheer. It is not a word of inspiration. It is the badge of poverty. It is the signal of distress. And there is not a man in the audience, not a white-haired man, who, if he will let his memory go back, will not recall then when things were the cheapest, men were the poorest. Cheap? Why? Cheap merchandise means cheap men, and cheap men means a cheap country. And that is not the kind of government our fathers founded. And it is not the kind their sons mean to maintain. If you want cheap things, go where you can get them. We want labor to be well paid." All right, that was my
Wow, what a find! Yeah. Please, if you would, in Telegram, send me that link, because I want to make like a infographic from that. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Cool, man.
Yeah, that's the footnote number 1 of how wise decoupling may be a good thing for both China and the West.
Awesome. Okay, so that's from your article. Awesome.
Okay, so now I just got to play the last ad. I'm so sorry, and then you can go.
Yep. Let's do that.
Okay, my pillow time. Here we are.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupting this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to mypillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows.
Oh, that kind of ended abruptly. I have no idea why.
No, I think it's all good. I think it's all good. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the Badlands boost just to see if we have any breaking history boosts. Okay, I'll read this boost real quick. Crane out 59 because this is relevant to you, and you. I don't know if you were here that day, but $48 from March 19th. Great job, guys. I learned so much from you too. Matt, great job on narratives on the narrative Sunday. Kudos, Ghost Gordon. You are Badlands Diamond in the rough. Best thing they ever did was ask you to speak at that Gart panel. Huge kudos, my friend. Bless. Crane out 59. Hopefully Crane will be at. He's been to multiple Garts, so hopefully you'll get to meet him in Boston or in Plymouth. But he's great. So thank you, Crane. Appreciate you, my man.
Thanks.
And then the other one was March 22nd, Mary Ellen 2, $50. I never realized how important history is to current discernment. You guys do a fantastic job of educating us. Love you both. Thank you, Mary Ellen. And then we have a rant from Kathy is free, $10. If people would listen and learn about history, perhaps they'd understand what's happening today. Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate your support. And then we had just one coming out under the wire. I think this is LIS2C, $10. You guys are awesome. Well, thank you for your support. Thanks everyone for listening. Please hit the thumbs up. We're going to do a kind of a hard exit here. And yeah, if you want to jump over to Badlands Live, I'm going to jump in there and do commentary with Ash. So Matt, till we speak again next week. This was an awesome episode. It's always great speaking with you, man. And I look forward to meeting you in person finally in Plymouth.
Yeah, me too. All right. Bye, everybody.
Some people say that mass immigration into the United States can help reduce world poverty.